the good part of growth assets is that the more you have, the better your choices are, right? So nothing like money in the bank to sleep well at night, whether it's a medical emergency or that cruise you want to take. I think gone are the days where we think about a simple life in, a rural community. People want vibrant post-retirement lives with travel, with socializing with friends. Maybe you eat out a few times less, but should you see the Eiffel Tower while you can? I think you should.
One of the biggest landmarks in the life of a working professional is retirement. Often it is bittersweet, and the transition to retired life is one that is approached with excitement, anticipation, and a healthy dose of indecision. And that last emotion is because you don't know what to do with a surplus of time and quite likely money. In many cases, you also worry that what you've saved is not going to be enough. This is Big Decisions on NDTV Profit, and I'm Alex Matthew. These weekly conversations are aimed at helping you make your most important financial decisions with confidence. And this week, we're talking about what you should do if you or someone that you know is about to retire or has just retired. To get a sense of how people think about money, we asked a few of them some interesting questions. Listen in.
The salary that we used to get, like we used to save it in fixed deposits, insurance policies, mutual funds.
I think my real estate investments have given me enough, so I don't want to get into the share market or other things.
Try to travel a little bit frugally, not that you need to be miserly about it, but where you don't have to splurge on unnecessary travel expenses.
Earn now, save now, but don't keep it away entirely for the future.
I've been investing in SIPs for like donkey's years, and I'm really proud of that. And I've told my kids to follow the same.
Start saving as soon as possible.
Don't invest everything for purchasing a house or something. You need to leave a packet, a sizable packet, which can keep giving you some income for your retired life.
I want to see as many countries as possible, before I call it a day.
And after my retirement, that's the first thing that I did was to travel a lot within India. And then I went abroad also.
Maybe I'll buy a first-class ticket for my Antarctica exploration.
Still putting it off is buying some diamonds for my better half.
I think immediately after retirement, I'll buy a large Louis Vuitton bag for travel.
Yeah, I want to spend it on a villa in Dubai where I work and a city.
I've been to the Everest base camp. I wanted to do it after retirement, but I did it last year. So maybe I'll do it once again.
It is very much on my bucket list that it would be, to go on a world cruise.
If I had to buy something really nice and if the budget was unlimited, maybe I'll go for a two-seater Merc.
If the budget is unlimited, I want to buy an executive jet and then travel around the globe.
Joining me today is Shalini Sekhri, Chief Growth Officer at Renaissance Investment Managers. Thank you so much for joining me on this conversation, Shalini.
Thanks so much, Alex. It's always a pleasure to be in studio with you.
This is an evergreen topic, and we've been speaking about this for quite a while, but I think it's an important conversation to have. I read a story recently, and this is not related to baby boomers in India. This related to baby boomers in the US, where they said that this particular generation has amassed much more wealth than their predecessors and Generation X as well, but they don't know how to spend. They've spent so much time earning and saving, but they don't know what to do now they've reached retirement. Is that something that you've come across in conversations as well?
Very true. I think it kind of leads back to the frugality mindset that you develop throughout your earning years. But the main thing you focus on is putting away for a rainy day. It's very hard to flip a switch once you retire. You now have money in the bank, but your entire life you've thought about saving. So it's quite hard to change spending patterns so quickly. So I think that's
But is that
one
across
point.
the board, or is this something that you witnessed with a few people? I know for a fact that my own acquaintances and people that I have interacted with have this problem. They think they're going to spend at some point, but once they reach that point, they don't actually want to put the money down.
Right. So besides this frugality mindset, there are a few other things that come to mind. One is that we live in such an uncertain world, and I think COVID has really brought that home to roost in so many ways. So there are a lot of things people now worry about. One is with the longevity of age. You worry that you're going to outlive your retirement savings. What then? So it's better to have money in the bank. Secondly, what if you have a sudden medical crisis? How do you tide over that? You may not suddenly have sufficient funds. That's another thing. What if markets correct sharply? So a number that you think of as in the bank, if it is invested across various asset classes, you could have a sudden fall in your portfolio value. All of these, I think, play heavily on our minds when we think about spending. And then, of course, you also turn a little non-material, right? You want to get into religious activities, you want to spend time with friends and family. That designer bag may not be what you really want to spend on, or you want to travel, but your health isn't as great as it used to be, so you don't. So I think a lot of things that you think will come to pass, I think sometimes life as we see it changes so much that it does not happen.
That's an interesting perspective, but in my head, it's always like the dog that's chasing the car. You're chasing the car for so long that once you reach the car, you don't know what to do with it. But on that note, let's talk about some of these issues that you have highlighted, right? And they're so important and they're so real.
Right.
The first and the most important concept is, do I have enough? And of course, time is available, but do I have enough money? How do you answer that question?
So actually, we always think about two extremes, right? One is, what if we die too early? Who's going to support our family? And that's when you think about, say, life insurance. The other extreme is, we're going to have so many years after we retire, and are we going to have enough money to support that? So there's a very simple rule of thumb that we call the 25x, or the 25 times rule, which basically says that if your expenses towards retirement are, say, an X amount, your retirement kitty should be 25 times into that, which means that you're funding approximately a 25-year retirement period.
Right.
So you consume about 4% of your kitty every year to fund your retirement, and this is a globally safe rule.
But is that something that is relevant to us here in India?
So to us in India, I would say that rule is more like a 30x rule, because we're in a very high inflation country. So if you think about it, I was just seeing, if your expenses were about, say, 12 lakhs a year, 10 years down the line, so say I'm 50 now, I spend 12 lakhs a year on my routine stuff. In 10 years time, when I'm 60, even at a 6% inflation, I need 21.5 lakhs, which basically means that inflation as well is really eroding your power. So 30x is a better rule if you want to account for that.
So that's one thing, and so we have a higher inflation, but the other aspect is that we're also a community that takes care of our children far longer than people in the West do. And so would that also have to factor in?
Sure. So I think your expenses do include the fact that, your children are going to be a part of your life. And a huge part of, not spending is also to leave an inheritance. So that's one of the reasons that parents don't spend on themselves, because as you get older, one is supporting your children, whether it's their education. Everyone's sending their kids abroad, as you know, it's so expensive. We are also in that middle generation. I'm 50 myself. So you're in a generation where you're looking after your parents, but you also have children who are still dependent on you, right? So you have all of that which you thought you'd be free of, but honestly, parents are living longer, kids are also still dependent on you. So all of this, has to be factored in. So when you plan your expenses, the other rule, like the 25x rule, is something that we use to simulate, called the Monte Carlo simulations.
The Monte Carlo, it sounds really fancy.
It's interesting. So that you might probably need a little bit of professional help to do, but it takes into account different scenarios. It factors in longer, say, longevity, you live longer, inflation may be higher, your portfolio may make less or more. So all of these factors are built into models, which then give you a range of what your retirement kitty should look like.
Okay.
So for that, you might need a professional advisor or a certified financial planner.
But is there some way that you can ask people to emulate this? If it's not exactly like this, they might come up with a facsimile, if you can call it that.
Sure. So it's just about factoring in inflation, take a minimum or maximum of what you expect your portfolio to deliver. So if, for example, you do have some equity, you might expect a double-digit return, whereas if you don't, it would be maybe 6 or 7%. So all of these can be built into a range to assume what your retirement kitty will give you. So I think having that range and creating a buffer for emergencies, I think that's extremely critical.
So the other aspect is, and we've talked about how much you need to have, But what if you don't have this? We have a lot of people listening in, and perhaps people who are going to be speaking to those people that need to save this amount of money, that are either retiring or have retired. What if they don't have this money? Because a lot of these individuals that we're talking about that are nearing 60 have only discovered equity markets, high growth assets very late in life, and they've not necessarily had the advantage that I think a lot of people of our generation will have when we reach that age.
Right. Interesting you said that. So I was looking at a Max Life Insurance study the other day, which said about 50% of their respondents had not yet started saving for retirement.
And we're talking about what age group?
It was a wide range. So even older people, about 60% believe their retirement kitty would get over in 10 years after they're retired. And 90% of the 50 pluses said that they had wished they had started saving way before. So clearly, I think it's a recurring theme that we leave it too late. I think in that scenario, unfortunately, one will really have to simplify life. Most of us do not have kids that live nearby, or people, the whole joint family scenario support is waning, and I think that's a reality. So very much we need to kind of live within our means. We need to ensure that we support ourselves. There are some thoughts I have on medical coverage, which is a big concern area. So maybe that's something that our viewers would be interested to know.
But before we get into the medical, how important is it for you to be staying in your own home? Because I would think that rental expenditure at that age, and I know that we talk about renting versus buying for so long, we've had this conversation, but ultimately when you do retire, if you're not living in your own home, it's going to be a very costly proposition.
Sure. So I think back in the day, till you were in your 40s and 50s, buying a home was not even an option.
Yeah.
So while we were brought up believing that the pinnacle of achievement and success is buying a home.
And then buying a car.
And then buying a car. You couldn't really do that till you could afford, a steady stream of income, which then got you a home loan and so on and so forth. But today you see kids in their 20s and, even 30-year-olds who are looking at buying a home. In a big city, renting is probably much cheaper, but I think it's a cultural thing. It's something that goes back to...
Much more expensive, you mean?
It is.
In a big city?
Yes, sorry, I meant it's much more expensive in a big city to buy than to rent, because the cost, your EMI is way more than what you would pay as rental. But owning a home is so much more than an investment, right? Yes. It's a sense of security, stability, where you belong. I think all of that is very cultural and emotional. So while it may not be the best either investment decision or even a rent versus buy decision, I think owning a home is certainly important by the time you retire. And I think that really happens now because you do have steady jobs in your 20s and 30s, you have a good income level, you can afford a loan. So I'm finding a lot more people, owning homes way earlier.
Okay. So let's quickly talk about the other aspects then. How do you curtail expenses? Because I would think that once you've reached close to 60 or you've crossed 60, you've gotten set in your ways, you've gotten set in the lifestyle that you have. You're used to having a certain brand of coffee in the morning. You're used to living a certain way. How do you curtail expenses?
You have no choice, right? So I think there are various ways. One is you can move to a smaller city.
Sure.
I think a lot of people today want to give. So how do you picture your retirement? Is it a peaceful life in the lap of nature? Or is it a bustling social life in a big city? Now, both of these will determine exactly what your future life is going to look like. And if you don't even imagine that, how do you create a roadmap to do that?
I'm dreaming of a seaside villa.
Yes, a lot of friends have moved to Goa. I think now they're all working hybrid or close to retirement, and people are just picking up. So while we talk about Gen Z being the digital nomads, I think in today's day and age with a laptop and a phone, you can live and work pretty much anywhere. And I think that's where we are seeing that a lot of people, to reduce expenses, are looking at moving to smaller, cozier cities where the overall cost of living is much lower. Many are forced to move in with grown kids. Maybe they need babysitters, I don't know. But sometimes that's happening. We're seeing that in families as well. So you really need to picture what your retired life will look like basis your financial situation, and you need to create a clear roadmap to get there.
The most important aspect that you have to take care of is your health after a certain age, and medical expenses are something that a lot of people that are around their 60s are worried about. You said that there is something that you have in the way of advice for people to follow. What is that?
Yes, Alex. So These are some expenses which you can't really foresee. So in addition to your regular health checkups, medication, you could contract a serious illness like say cancer.
Yeah.
You could have an emergency hospitalization, right? So there are a few things one must do. Medical care gets very expensive as you get older. So one of the things one should start really early is building an emergency medical corpus.
Okay.
So every year from when you're fairly young, put away some small amount into a separate either mutual fund scheme or something earmarked as your medical emergency fund. This will grow tremendously over the years. And unless you're seriously ill, it should not be touched. So an emergency fund is something that one should certainly build.
A side pocket for emergencies, but
yes.
So health insurance obviously is too costly, right?
So health insurance is an option. I know I've taken some for my parents. You need to get in before 75, but then you can continue. It's a little expensive, but if you can afford it, I think this is not one area you should cut corners. Health insurance, as much as you can afford, you should certainly take it. And there are schemes out there. There are at least 3 or 4 companies that offer that. You must remember, of course, that for senior citizens, there is something called a co-pay.
Yeah.
Where for every expense that the insurance company pays, you have to pay a bit, right? So that's can be a hefty chunk. So you need that emergency corpus. You also need medical insurance, which is Mediclaim. And lastly, you should also continue to have investments in what we call growth assets, which to us in simple words might be equity.
But a lot of people are uncomfortable with that, Shalini, and that's the case for a lot of people. Of course, they've gotten more comfortable now because the markets have performed in a certain way. But I know my own father, I had to convince him for the longest time, he was maximizing his savings in the voluntary provident fund while he was earning. And he was earning a comfortable, 9% or thereabouts when the EPF was giving you that. And then I had to convince him 30% is what I told him. Is that the right approach, or did I give him bad advice?
I don't think it was bad advice. So some equity allocation I think is critical, because today if you look at the avenues to beat inflation, and I'm not talking about the 6-7% we see as headline numbers, but when you buy food, when you pay for medicines, inflation is a much higher number. So honestly, there is no way out of equity. And as we've been told from the beginning, the best way to get over the risk element of equity is to stay invested as long as you possibly can.
But how much should you have?
So a lot of investment portfolios, as they come towards retirement, start skewing more towards fixed income.
Yeah.
So while through SIPs, etc., you might be 80% equity till the time you retire, there's certainly a case for reallocation. I think prevention of capital erosion is so important at this stage.
Yeah.
So at that time, a lot of people look at maybe 20 to 30%. If it's anything less than that, at a portfolio level, it will not be a meaningful number, because even if it does well, and it's just say 5-10% of your portfolio, unfortunately, it will not really bring the overall return up or be meaningful.
It doesn't move the needle.
So stay invested as long as possible. Really use this money when you absolutely have to, or keep booking profits, but otherwise have some equity.
The other aspect is what is the composition of this equity, because I know a lot of people buy direct equity, which is perfectly fine, and generally I've seen that people tend to gravitate towards the large caps, but of late they've been moving towards the small cap and the micro cap. I know that small cap mutual funds have been sold very aggressively, irrespective of your risk profile, and I've heard a few scary stories. How should you go about the composition?
So certainly I would say large cap is the way to go, because within equity as well as a space, as you rightly said, not everything is equal. You will certainly have pockets which come with far less volatility, far less downside, or what we call risk. And that really means that you have a wide array, whether it's a passive index fund which just replicates the Nifty, or a good large cap mutual fund or portfolio management service. I think that gives you the ability to make fantastic returns, and we are also excited about Indian equity.
Is there any room for small cap in a portfolio for a retired individual?
I would say it depends on the size of the portfolio, but if it's not a very large corpus, I would say stay with large caps. In India today, you just told me the name of the best performing, one of the best performing stocks. Can you remind me what that is?
State Bank of India.
State Bank of India. So if you can make phenomenal returns by buying State Bank of India, why would you need to go down the quality curve? So I'm saying India is exciting. Equity markets will make returns over the next 5-7 years. You don't really need to compromise on quality or go down the market cap curve. Certainly not for retired people with the ability to take lower risk than someone at the start of their professional life.
Okay. Now let's talk about a few people that have the advantage of pension. Not everybody does. In fact, that number is now reducing quite significantly. is it much easier for them to manage, and particularly government employees that are of a certain age have that advantage?
So if I were to take my own example, my father's a retired colonel from the army.
Wow, okay.
And you know, when he first retired, he made so little pension that there's no way we could have survived on that. But as we speak today, the way the pension has been reset to earmark for things like inflation, we're able to run the house very, very comfortably with dad's pension, right? So the fact is that things are keeping up, but the minority that receives pension in our country is just so small that for most people like us from the private sector or the unorganized sector, you have no option but to fend for yourself.
So no social security. That's the truth for most of us. How do you manage then? Do you allocate a certain amount of money? You said the 25x rule, but how do you subdivide the expenses that you will have to make? Because ultimately we go back to the original point. You don't want to only live and survive. You want to experience life, and so many things that you've set out to do, and you push down the line saying, look, I will retire, I will take care of my kids, and then I will see to myself. You want to do those things as well.
Sure, I think gone are the days where we think about a simple life in, you know, a rural community. People want vibrant post-retirement lives with travel, with socializing with friends. For all of that, you need money, certainly. So I think one of the things that it's easier for HNIs who look at a very, very wide range of assets, including art, unlisted investments, etc. But for most other people, I would say there are two phases to retirement planning. One is when you accumulate, and that should include a healthy amount of equity. And then what we call the decumulation, where you're actually withdrawing from your portfolio on a regular basis to fund your lifestyle. So that's where really the 25-30x rule comes into play. From that perspective, if you think about it, asset allocation will change as you age, but certainly you need growth assets in your portfolio. And I think that's where that little bit of cream on top will come. You have a great year, you withdraw it, you go for a cruise on the Riviera. I mean, that's life, right? So markets will allow you to enjoy some of those luxuries. But for a lot of us, I mean, we think about creating a HUF structure for tax efficiency.
Yeah.
You know, all of those, we think about succession planning.
Let me ask you a different question. If you have that 30x, if you have that 25x,
right,
should you, you know, confirm that you can do that one international trip in a year?
Oh yes, definitely, definitely. I think if you have that, you certainly can plan it. There are just, you know, every imaginable kind of trip today, whether you've been an international traveler all your life or not. I think
or even domestic, there are lots of options available.
Absolutely. So I think there is a lot one can do today. So I think travel is a big part of one plans for, as you finally have the time to do the things that you enjoy. And I think that's something one should not compromise on. Maybe you eat out a few times less, but should you see the Eiffel Tower while you can, I think you should.
Okay, now the other aspect that I would think of is what you keep for the next generation. And I must tell you that on this particular program, we have had a conversation about legacy, and we've had a conversation about how important it is for individuals of a certain age to initiate the conversation with their children. But when it comes to handing things over, inheritance, what should the person who is giving out the wealth bear in mind?
So, one is, I think people should not worry about leaving an inheritance. That's my personal view. I know it's quite extreme.
No, I agree with that.
And I've always urged older family members to use whatever last rupee that they have, right?
Yes, because you worked so hard to earn it.
You have. And they've educated us, and I think we can pretty much do our own thing. We don't need their money. So,
can I be honest? I was hoping that you would say this when I asked you this question.
Yeah, so I don't believe inheritance is something that children should firstly expect. Parents might leave it out of love, but I would genuinely urge anyone, if they love their parents, to please encourage them to spend all their money. So I think if you, of course, there are a lot of wealthy people who have enough money for multiple generations, and they of course have plenty of help in terms of, you know, trust structures, how do you do your succession planning. So of course all that is there, and most parents would like to leave something for their children. But I think that should just be a byproduct of what's left after you've done everything that you choose to do.
So the last question, which is beyond a certain age, you're talking about if you don't have children, for example, or if they're not nearby, and assuming that you have to take care of yourself, assisted living becomes very important, and living perhaps in an old age home. Or I'm also talking about having real estate that you don't want to transfer. Maybe a reverse mortgage is something that you consider. How feasible are these options?
So I think The simplest way is you can always sell what you have and buy in a place of your choice, right? You don't need complicated structures to move to a place that you love. So yes, I think living with children is not very feasible for most people anymore. Many don't even have children. And I think the older you get, the more you want to be with like-minded people. So with about 100 million plus seniors in India as we speak today.
And growing.
The real estate development sector is focusing hugely on senior living communities. And these can be a very wide range, Alex. So from communities that promote an active and vibrant lifestyle to those which are more like assisted living, where medical care is foremost in terms of the services they provide, and even to specialized communities for retiring NRIs. I have seen a very, very wide gamut of options for people. And this is where you get a sense of community, you get a sense of being with like-minded people. And I think that's what you need when the younger generation are too busy for you.
Is that 25x okay though? Or do you need more?
Because like I said, there's a wide range.
Sure.
And I think the good part of growth assets is that the more you have, the better your choices are, right? So nothing like money in the bank to sleep well at night, whether it's a medical emergency or that cruise you want to take. And lastly, I would say we are blessed to live in a country like India, where even if you do not want to leave home, you have the ability to afford all these specialized nursing care. You have doctors that come home, and so many of these services which allow us to continue to be in the comfort of our home, but have access to a lot of specialized care at home. So I think that's the luxury of living in India, where we do have all of this.
So hopefully over the course of our conversation, we've helped people reduce their indecision and worry about dealing with retirement, and we've helped them decide that they're going to enjoy the life that they've earned over the course of their careers. Thank you so much.
I certainly believe these are the golden years and one should make the most of it. You've worked hard your whole life. This is the time to enjoy that time.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Shalini,
Alex.
for joining
Thanks for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure bringing you this episode of Big Decisions. Do let us know what you think in the comment section, and don't forget to share. This is NDTV Profit.